Thank you much, and good morning or afternoon or evening, whatever's appropriate for wherever you happen to be today. It is a balmy and temperate 5 whopping degrees in sunny Indianapolis today. It's a beautiful, clear, bright day. From inside, it looks spring-like outside until you open the door and step outside, and then by golly, it's cold. We've got snow coming in this evening again, and it's not likely to melt anytime soon. So I'm going to be very thankful when mid-March and April get here. I keep threatening to move to either LA or Taiwan, or even somewhere warmer, and yet every winter I find myself sitting here threatening to move. I guess it's just one of those things. Today is more of a talk about observations than anything in particular. I've titled this A Preoccupation with Evil because I see a lot of things going on in society that I find more than a little disturbing. But when I stop and think about those things, I realize that an awful lot of them have been around for a very long time, and perhaps too much concern is not warranted. I don't know. From the earliest times of recorded history, from the earliest writings of Scripture, and in ancient China, that was much earlier than it was in the Middle East. People have been preoccupied with good and evil and the relationship between the two, and with the operations and functions of society relative to those two terms. And in fact, in the Old Testament, we can find the well-read and virtually pandemic story of Noah. There's almost no one who doesn't know this story, where the author says that in the time of Noah, the thoughts of men were of evil continually, and that it repented God that he had made man in his image, and so he decided to destroy man, to wipe man from the face of the earth, with the exception of one righteous individual, Noah, and his family. Of course, he commanded Noah to build an enormous boat and collect 2 of every living thing on the world and put them in the boat and ride out the flood. What's interesting about that particular story is the reason for the flood. According to the Old Testament, it says that it repented God that he had made man. Repentance is an interesting word, particularly in that usage. To repent of something means to give it up and never go back. That's what it means. It's not just a sense of remorse or the realization of a mistake or an error. It includes both a realization and an action. And so with the exception of Noah and his family, what the book says is that God in his heart felt that the creation of man was a huge mistake, and that he was going to rectify that mistake, which was the reason for the flood in the times of Noah. And interestingly enough, there are a number of ancient traditions who record a flood for possibly the same educational reasons. I tend to regard these things these days as cautionary tales, as morality tales, as stories to remind people that bad things happen to us if we're not attentive to being positive and, if you will, good. Completely at the other end of the Bible from the story of Noah is the book of Revelation. And throughout the New Testament, one of the pressing questions that the disciples of Jesus would put to him is, how do we know when the end days are coming? How do we know when the end of the world is near to us? And what Jesus would tell them is, look for these signs, that things would be as they were in the time of Noah, meaning that the hearts and minds of men everywhere would be of evil continually, and that would be one of the precursors to the end of the world. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your outlook, the last several predictions for the end of the world haven't exactly panned out quite the way that the predictors would have wanted. I tend to be very thankful for that. I kind of enjoy my life, although I'm not sure what I'd do to prevent the end of the world if it were coming. It's just one of those things. But so far, despite a number of indicators from the book of Revelation being present in society, the end of the world still has not caught up with us. I think there's a reason for that. I think those signs have been there all along in every society, in every culture, in every group of people. There are those who follow a more positive and uplifting path, and there are those who follow a more negative and less auspicious path. And sometimes there are those who are just plain evil. And I think it has always been so and likely will always be so. In the here and now, though, I look around me on TV, in the movie theaters, in the media, in music, just all around. And what I see that concerns me is this massive societal desensitization to violence and horror and to a dark spirituality. Everywhere you go, for instance, you can turn on any TV channel over the weekend and find a good zombie movie on, or a vampire movie. There's one on the TV right now that's on, or some kind of a war and conflict movie, or something having to do with the darker aspects of spirituality, movies like, Hellboy, which is meant to be a comedy, but grows out of this dark spirituality. I'm not real sure, like I said, that this sort of thing hasn't been around all along in some segment of the population or another. But what I'm seeing is that this is a pervasive societal direction that's going on here. It seems to be everywhere all the time. And it appeared so to my parents and my teachers when I was younger. I know that. Just a few years before I was born, of course, Alan Freed, the disc jockey who brought 1950 styles rock and roll to the United States, was vilified as the destroyer of the youth of America. I'm old enough to remember Alan Freed, although I was very young then. And of course, during the 60s and 70s, there was the hippie counterculture and acid rock and the acid that went along with it, and all sorts of other fun stuff that I am very much old enough to remember. And people worried then what the effect of all of this would be on society. And interestingly enough, what rose primarily out of the hippie counterculture were a lot of people who these days are in charge of industries and businesses that are behind an awful lot of the green movement and the caring for our planet and other people movements. People who actually care about the plight of their fellow man and have made a good living doing so. Okay. But the other thing that came out of that was, of course, the other side, which was a large-scale use of addictive narcotics, which is not a good thing, particularly when that's not managed by a physician. That led to a lot of poverty, a lot of want, a lot of pain, a lot of crime, and that has not diminished over the years appreciably, despite our government's best efforts to get rid of it. The thing that concerns me about this desensitization the most is that desensitization creates a loss of compassion. The more that we witness violence and horror, the less susceptible we are to being emotionally moved by it, to being moved from a perspective of inactivity to rising up to say, no, I don't want to tolerate this. I don't want this to happen. And sometimes complacency becomes the breeding ground for an ever increasing amount and intensity of those sorts of things. To watch, some of the movies that are coming out these days, the topics that they deal with are much more intensely emotionally effective than they used to be. For instance, compare movies like Friday the 13th from the 70s and 80s to their modern day remakes. They're much more emotion evoking than they once were. They're not just suspenseful, they're suspenseful at a very deep level. They put the real scare factor in them. And people become desensitized to that. And that desensitization causes for folks to be generally desensitized, less sensitive to the plight of their fellow man, less attuned to the more positive aspects of society and themselves, perhaps somewhat dulled to things that we should not be apathetic about. I think that desensitization gives rise to the generation of me, right? When we spend our time immersed in technology, whether it's first-person shooters or websites or whatever, when we're immersed in the fantasy world, when we're immersed in the world that glorifies dark spirituality and individuality and combat and death and horror, we become isolated, we become less socialized, we become less attuned to and aware of the feelings of those around us, and more able to block out and blow off the folks around us who actually might need us. I have seen that process occur in my children, and over time taken a lot of steps to try to mitigate that. It appears to be relatively harmless at first, until all of a sudden you realize that your kids are spending 6 or 8 hours a day living in a 1.5 square foot space inside that computer, shooting up the entire world. And then it's not so harmless anymore. I think being desensitized to those sorts of things causes us to have selective vision when we encounter people on the street, that it makes it easier in some regards to regard other people as not worthy of our compassion, as not worthy of our help, that it allows us to fragment society into an us and a them, and whoever the us is worthy of the goodness we have left within us, but the rest of the folks are not. And I think those things are dangerous at a personal level. I think those things are all precursors to a lack of spiritual refinement and development. I think those things tend to shut down that portion of our mind that perhaps should be focused on things that are much more uplifting. Now, well, where we spend our time and energy is what we're going to bring into our reality. Okay. Once again, from the Bible forward, and from many of the teachings that are much more ancient than the Bible, we know that we become what we think we are. That is, the energies and the thoughts, the emotions, the activities that we devote our time and our energy to, they shape us, they change us, they mold us into those kinds of people. And so we can say that negative thoughts, negative actions will create a negative life. And the same can be said for positive thoughts and actions. Those things will create a positive life, completely regardless of the effects of karma at this point, but simply based upon what we devote our time and our energy to, right? Our actions shape our minds. Our thoughts and emotions shape our being. And so, positive actions, positive thoughts, positive emotions, a positive path produce positive results. And those positive actions and positive personal results lift up everyone around us. That's a wonderful thing. And those positive actions and positive thoughts, the positive path, if you will, kind of shines the light on the path to the Tao of heaven, that place where we all are trying to walk right now. And I think that path now more than ever is important. I think that in many ways, our personal spiritual journey is made to be an example, a light to those who maybe have the affinity but lack the availability to the Tao teachings, right? When we focus our minds on the Tao teachings, we work to eliminate that darkness that exists. We're not focused on the next round of Grand Theft Auto, hopefully, or or on the latest scare movie or the latest death metal, but rather on the processes of spiritual refinement and evolution, of bringing about the emergence of the true self. We become more compassionate day by day, and perhaps more helpful to other people around us by virtue of that compassion. We practice that positivity that's so doggone vital to continuing our forward progress down the path. But in so doing, we become detached from that societal norm. We become different. We become set apart in some ways by refusing to be a part of the darkness that's all around us. I think the ancient Tao sages understood that. I think they understood it deeply, because in talking about detachment, it's never a detachment that separates us from other people. It's a detachment that reduces our need to suffer in this life and increases our wisdom, but it doesn't remove us from the world of other human beings. And it's one of the big reasons why the Iguan Tao doesn't have a monastic order, as it were, because the Tao teachings aren't cultivated individually on their own, but rather in society with other people. And it's very, very difficult to cultivate those teachings without interacting with others. So just exactly what is evil anyway? Is it the media, the TV, and the movies, or what we read, or rock and roll, or the latest designer drugs of choice? I have my own list there. I will say that most of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s turned out relatively okay, as far as I know. There were some who did not, obviously, but that's true of any society. And I don't think we can completely blame the media or our society for those evils and ills. Those things have always been available. They will always be available in one flavor or another. It's a matter of personal choice and discipline that determines whether or not one will succumb to that particular path. And so for me, evil becomes anything that manipulates my life away from the pursuit of the Tao teachings. And that's actually specifically why I chose to chat about that for a few minutes this morning. Because a lot of people have an awful lot to say about a particular album, a particular movie, a particular cult. Take your pick for topic. But not too many people talk about the wider influence of what we might call negativity or evil within our own society. And what becomes the face of evil is what takes us away from that positive path, what turns our head from being headed towards the Tao of heaven and points us back down towards the dirt. Those sorts of things we have to be careful for. I don't think that listening to a particular brand of rock and roll or watching a particular movie is going to turn anybody into a completely negative soul. I don't believe so. That's, of course, my opinion. But I do believe that what we surround ourselves with will have a tremendous impact on our psychology and on our lives. And so I choose to keep myself pointed on the path. That's what it means to me. But the more salient question, the bigger point is, what does it mean to you? And I would challenge each of you today to give that some thought and to think about if maybe there are ways to become more positive and more focused on that path. Pardon. So to kind of wrap up, doggone it, I missed a title slide. Just goes to show I'm as human as the next guy. The symptoms that we see in our society are kind of indicators that we can use to further our own progress down the path. Okay? So doing that, adhering to that spiritual path will definitely cause us to be seen as different. We had a few experiences with that in Taiwan. I've had a few since then. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We take a bit of a derision from other people because we adhere to this path. But this is a good path to adhere to. And if somebody wants to deride me for adhering to it, that's okay. Perhaps one day, they'll understand why I follow it. The other thing is we need to be showing compassion to all sentient beings without prejudice or attachment or motives or a hidden agenda of any kind. And if we're not, then we need to be reminded of that and refocus ourselves so that we're following the teachings appropriately. And of course, the Tao teachings are best followed in society with real honest to goodness people. We can't master skillful living in a bubble. It can't be done. It has to be done in the society in which we live with the people we live with. And if we do those things, then we can be aware of the evil. We can be surrounded by the darkness, but we don't have to be touched by it. We can live a much more positive, much more joyous, and much more uplifting life simply by increasing our awareness and redefining our focus. Thanks a whole bunch, and you all have a wonderful, great day. And thank you for letting me share with you.